My next guest grew up in Shiite Muslim Iran. Now, 2 decades later, he's the op-ed editor of the New York Post and a Roman Catholic. I sat down with him recently here in D.C. to talk about his story and his new memoir, From Fire by Water, My Journey to the Catholic Faith. Here's my exclusive interview with Sohrab Ahmari. Sohrab, what compelled you to write a book about your conversion to Catholicism?
Well, I began a period of instruction with a priest. I was living in London at the time after I had decided to join the Catholic Church. That was in, let's say, late May 2016, and I didn't plan to announce it or anything, that this was a personal matter. But then in July 2016, something horrible happened across the English Channel. As you remember, Father Jacques Hamel was murdered by Islamists inspired by Islamic State. And that incident moved me, just the images of this frail and gentle priest, the idea that he was killed while he was celebrating the Mass, moved me so much that I thought I had to react somehow. So I went on Twitter and I said, I am Jacques Hamel. And I added that, oh, by the way, I should announce that I'm under catechesis to become a Roman Catholic. Now, I was not prepared for that tweet to go viral. You know, thousands of people retweeted it, and it got posted on Facebook and so forth. And a lot of people assumed, because I have an Iranian background, that I must have been a Muslim who instantaneously, by witnessing this tragedy, instantaneously decided to convert, which was not true. It was actually the culmination of a years-long process of reading and thinking and some providential encounters with the Mass. But I wasn't prepared to answer all of the questions I was receiving. So ultimately, I decided to write a book, and Father Fessio at Ignatius Press was kind enough to just offer for me to publish my memoir with him without me having to shop it around. And so that's how From Fire by Water came about.
Now, you grew up in Iran. Your family is not religious, yet the government is religious. I mean, and really the whole world outside your home, including school, is focused on Islam. What effect did that have on your thinking about religion and faith, that foundation?
Well, two effects. The first is that Islam, as I encountered it, and I think it's a statement I can generalize about, is a religion of pure law and political dominion. And how I experienced that was growing up in post-revolutionary Iran. It was a country that had suddenly re-Islamized itself through quite dictatorial means. And so I was encountering this situation where at home we had this sort of humanistic, secular, liberal kind of worldview with Western books and Western ideas all over. But outside we had to pretend to be something else. And that, for me, created this clash between the inside world and the outside world, and this sense that if God is just purely a set of laws and he demands a police state to enforce his norms, well, I don't want anything to do with that God. And at 13, I decided to be an atheist. At the same time, in the Shiite Muslim faith, there is this great tradition of martyrs and martyrdom. And I was always moved by that aspect. Even after I sort of became an unbeliever, some parts of it, of the Shiite saints who gave their lives for, their truth, moved me. And so that was imprinted on me. And years later, for me, I discovered in Christianity and Catholicism specifically, that same moving idea of self-sacrifice unto death. The difference being that obviously in Christianity, it's God himself who takes this reversal of roles, where he makes himself the sacrifice. So although initially Islam completely alienated me and it led me to atheism, there was some pieces in it that in some mysterious providential way also led me ultimately to the one true faith.
When you come to the U.S., you're 13 years old, and it is not exactly what you expected. And you're disappointed, according to the book, at the lack of intellectual life in Utah, where you find yourself. And in your late teens, you discover Nietzsche and Sartre, and you become what you describe as a card-carrying communist. What was it about those writings that appealed to you?
Well, I think even after I decided that there is no God, foolishly, I still was looking for ultimate truths and meanings. So obviously, like any kind of only child, alienated, fresh off the boat teenager, I went into the philosophy section of the bookstore and discovered the world of Nietzsche and all of his progeny and Marxism and so forth. And what I would say is that although those writers took me down paths that I now radically reject and disagree with, in that quest, for example, in Marxism, I was still seeking after meaning and in a way after religion, because Marxism, as you know, has a kind of messianic structure to it. There's a belief that history moves in a predetermined direction, and finally in this kind of apocalyptic revolutionary event, all of the past injustices are redeemed by the sort of revolutionary working class, whatever that means. So there is this urge, I think, in a lot of young people, certainly in me, for truth, for redemption, but it was finding expression in all the wrong places for much of my life.
You write in the book that you smoked and drank and randomly hooked up for many years, and then one day in 2008, you're wandering around New York City and you step into a church near Penn Station as a mass is about to begin. Now, what happened there?
On this occasion, as I was walking around Manhattan and this despondent state of kind of self-disgust, I circled about this sort of 4-block area until I just walked into a Capuchin monastery that happens to be the heart of Manhattan, and I found this unbelievable sense of, first of all, the serenity, the calmness of the place, and then the liturgy, the mystery of the liturgy really touched me. And this was at a time when I was publicly still professing to be a non-believer, but something about the action of the Mass and the prayers of consecration and so forth reduced me to tears. And then on my way out, as you know, I had composed myself by the end of the Mass, but on my way out, I stopped in the vestibule and I saw a portrait of Pope Benedict XVI, and that again reduced me to tears. So there were two things at play there. In the Mass itself was the sort of redemptive sacrifice, but also in the figure of Pope Benedict, whom I didn't know. I mean, I hadn't really read anything he'd written, but just the idea of stable, continuous, even absolute authority, which he embodies and which is sort of shown through his portrait there. Those both came together. So that's a very Catholic experience before I even knew, I hadn't even read much of the Bible at that point. So.
Wow. Now, you were always a reader, though, and you attribute two books in particular. You talk about Benedict XVI's book on Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the 5 books of Moses as being kind of transformational for you. In what way were they transformational?
In a sense that I'd always subscribed to the view, I think as many of my contemporaries do, that whatever is the newest is best, whatever is latest is best. And so the first thing was to read the 5 books of Moses and realize that the truths that it contains there speak to me, 3,000 years later, are still just as fresh. That, in other words, that moral truth is a thing in itself that deserves to be answered on its own terms, and no amount of scientific discovery or social advancement or technology will fundamentally alter those basic questions we face about right and wrong and conscience and our relationship with the universe, with the metaphysical structure of the world. What Pope Benedict helped me understand was first that the Bible, the Old and New Testament, form one interconnected whole. It's one narrative arc in which God draws ever nearer to his creation, to the point of this sort of mind-boggling idea of the incarnation, in which he becomes one of us and even consents to be humiliated and scourged and crucified by us. And second, that the witness of the gospel writers, of the evangelists, is perfectly plausible and reasonable for a modern person to accept. That okay, they didn't have tape recorders, but for all sorts of very deep reasons that I can't get into here, he points out how consistent they are and how this really happened, and an intelligent person can believe this.
Before I let you go, it's got to be difficult coming into a church at a time when there is such contestation within, such conflict over basic doctrine, and then you've got this sex abuse, the second iteration of the sex abuse crisis kind of swirling on the periphery. Does that concern you at all? What do you tell people when they say, why are you converting to a faith like this?
Well, I still think it's the fullness of truth, first of all. Look, the Christian idea of human nature to go to the sex abuse is not a naive one. again, our idea of human nature begins with the fall and of Adam trying to sit in God's place. So, we're not starry-eyed about what human beings are like, and then even a divinely instituted body like the Catholic Church will have people in it who are lousy. And even I could be pretty lousy were it not for grace. So that's one. And second is, the reason ultimately when I decided to become a Christian, it was to join the Catholic Church, was because the Church is its own witness. Again, the very fact of this one institution spanning 2019 years, 2 millennia, through all the efforts to wipe it out, from Napoleon to Stalin to every Roman tyrant you can think of, it still basically preaches the same thing, is the same thing. That's, it gives me, it's a sort of evidence for what our Lord tells Peter, that, on this rock I will build my church.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for the book. Thanks for the time. And we've got to get you back to talk about some contemporary issues.
Sure.
When you have a moment.
Thank you, Raymond.
From Fire by Water, My Journey to the Catholic Faith by Sohrab Ahmari is available at bookstores everywhere and online. You can also read his columns at the New York Post and the Catholic Herald. And remember, Will Wilder 3, out this week. Get your copy, read it with your family. It's a wonderful way to bond together, to enjoy an imaginative experience, and to learn something about the Bible as well as history. And a fun ride, I think, for everybody.